In the summer of 1891, a chance encounter on the banks of the Missouri River would forever change the lives of two people from different worlds. Sarah Mitchell, a young schoolteacher from Boston, never imagined that saving a drowning child would lead to one of the most extraordinary experiences of her life. When 50 Lakota warriors appeared at her doorstep days later, led by the boy's grandfather, a respected elder named Rising Sun, she faced a moment that would challenge everything. She thought she knew about courage, gratitude, and the profound connections that bind us all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Missouri River stretched like a silver ribbon across the plains as Sarah Mitchell gazed out from her small cabin window. The morning light cast long shadows across the tall grass, and a cool breeze carried the scent of wildflowers through the open door. At 23, Sarah had left behind the comforts of Boston society to teach at a small settlement school near the Dakota Territory. Her father had called it foolishness, her mother had wept, but Sarah had been determined. The West called to her with promises of purpose and adventure that the drawing rooms of Beacon Hill could never provide. For nearly a year, she had taught the children of settlers, trappers, and traders in a one-room schoolhouse at the edge of Riverton, a growing community perched on the banks of the Missouri. That morning in late June 1891, school had been dismissed for the summer, and Sarah found herself with time to explore the wilderness she had glimpsed only from afar. She packed a small basket with bread, cheese, and a book of poetry by Whitman, tucked a journal and pencil into her pocket, and set out along the riverbank. Her lightweight cotton dress and wide-brimmed hat were concessions to the growing heat of the day. As she walked, Sarah breathed deeply, savoring the freedom of solitude. Birds called to one another in the cottonwood trees that lined the water's edge, and occasionally a fish would break the surface of the river with a silver flash. 2 miles. Downstream from Riverton, Sarah found a perfect spot to rest, a small clearing beneath an ancient cottonwood, its roots creating a natural seat overlooking a wide, gentle bend in the river. Here, the water moved slowly, creating small eddies. Near the shore, she spread her shawl on the ground and settled in with her book, occasionally looking up to watch the water flow past, marveling at the endless journey of the mighty Missouri. Time slipped away as she read, the rhythm of Whitman's words blending with the murmur of the river. A sudden splash broke her concentration, louder than a fish jumping. Sarah looked up, shading her eyes against the sun's glare on the water. At first, she saw nothing unusual, and was about to return to her reading when she caught sight of movement, arms, flailing in the water, about 30 yards from shore. It took her a moment to comprehend what she was seeing, a child struggling in the current. Without hesitation, Sarah dropped her book and ran to the water's edge. The splashing continued, accompanied now by desperate gasps. She kicked off her shoes and waded in, her dress immediately heavy with water. The child, a boy she could see, now was being pulled toward the center of the river where the current ran stronger. "Hold on!" she called, pushing deeper into the water. The riverbed dropped away suddenly beneath her feet, and Sarah found herself swimming, her sodden dress dragging at her limbs. She had learned to swim in the cold Atlantic waters off the Massachusetts coast, but the river was different, murkier, with unpredictable currents that tugged at her legs. The boy's head disappeared beneath the surface. Sarah dove, eyes open, in the murky water, hands reaching blindly. Her fingers brushed against fabric, and she grasped it tightly, pulling the child toward her. Breaking the surface, she wrapped one arm around the boy's chest, using her free arm to fight against the current that threatened to pull them both downstream. He was small, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with long black hair and copper skin, a Isais Native American child. His eyes were closed, his body limp in her arms. Panic surged through Sarah as she struggled toward the shore, her strength waning with each stroke. The riverbank seemed impossibly far away. Just as her muscles began to fail her, Sarah's foot touched the riverbed. With renewed determination, she hauled the unconscious child through the shallows and onto the grassy bank. Dropping to her knees beside him, she turned him onto his side. Water spilled from his mouth, but he didn't breathe. Sarah had read about drowning in her father's medical books. Working quickly, she turned the boy onto his back, tilted his head, and pressed firmly on his chest. "Breathe," she whispered, fear making her voice tremble. "Please, breathe." After what seemed an eternity, the child coughed violently, water spilling from his mouth as he gasped for air. Relief washed over Sarah as his eyes fluttered open, dark and confused. He stared up at her, then tried to scramble away, fear replacing confusion on his young face. "It's all right," Sarah said softly, staying where she was to avoid frightening him further. "You're safe now." The boy said something in a language she didn't understand. Lakota, she guessed, based on what she knew of the tribes in the region. He was shivering despite the warm day, his simple clothes soaked through. Sarah reached for her shawl and offered it to him. "Here," she said, holding it out with a gentle smile. "You're cold." After a moment's hesitation, the boy accepted the shawl, wrapping it around his shoulders. He spoke again, this time with a questioning tone, his dark eyes watching her carefully. "My name is Sarah," she said, placing a hand on her chest. "Sarah Mitchell." The boy seemed to understand the introduction. He mirrored her gesture, placing his small hand on his own chest. "Little Eagle," he said clearly. Sarah smiled. "Little Eagle," she repeated. "I'm glad to meet you, though I wish it had been under different circumstances." He didn't seem to understand her words, but the friendly tone appeared to reassure him. Little Eagle looked around, as if suddenly remembering something important. He pointed upstream and spoke rapidly, his expression urgent. "Your family," Sarah guessed. "Are they looking for you?" Little Eagle nodded, seeming to grasp her meaning. He stood, still clutching her shawl around his shoulders, and pointed again upstream. "I'll help you find them," Sarah said, gathering her scattered belongings. Her book lay forgotten on the bank, its pages damp and swollen. She tucked it into her basket and offered her hand to the boy. After a brief hesitation, he took it. They walked along the riverbank, Sarah's dress dripping and heavy around her legs. Little Eagle moved with surprising energy for someone who had nearly drowned minutes earlier, though she noticed he stayed well away from the water's edge. Occasionally he would stop and call out something that echoed across the river. After about 15 minutes of walking, they heard an answering call. Little Eagle's face lit up, and he shouted again, waving his free arm. Soon Sarah could make out two figures hurrying toward them along the riverbank, a woman and a teenage boy, both dressed in traditional Lakota clothing. The woman ran the last few yards, dropping to her knees before Little Eagle and embracing him tightly, her words flowing rapidly in Lakota. The boy, perhaps 16 or 17, stood back, watching Sarah with wary eyes. Little Eagle spoke excitedly, gesturing toward Sarah and then the river. The woman looked up, her dark eyes widening as she regarded Sarah. She was middle-aged, with streaks of gray in her long black hair and a face marked by both strength and kindness. Rising slowly, she approached Sarah and took both her hands in a firm grip. "Pilamaya," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," Sarah smiled, touched by the woman's gratitude even though she understood only the sentiment behind the words. "He fell into the river," she explained, miming swimming, and then pointing to Little Eagle. "I'm just glad I was there." The teenage boy stepped forward and spoke to the woman in Lakota. She replied, and he turned to Sarah. "My mother says you saved my brother from the great water spirit," he said in careful, accented English. "He cannot swim. The river would have taken him to the spirit world if not for you." "You speak English very well," Sarah said, relieved to have a translator. "I learned at the missionary school," he replied with a hint of pride. "My name is Swift Fox. This is my mother, Wachiwi, and you have met my brother, Little Eagle." "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she replied. "I teach at the school in Riverton." Swift Fox translated for his mother, who nodded and spoke again, her expression solemn. "My mother says we owe you a life debt," Swift Fox translated. "Little Eagle is the grandson of our chief rising sun. She says our family will never forget what you have done." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment. "Please tell her that anyone would have done the same." After Swift Fox translated, Wachiwi shook her head firmly and spoke again. "She says not anyone would risk themselves for a Lakota child," Swift Fox said quietly. "Many white people would have watched him drown." The blunt statement struck Sarah like a physical blow. She knew there was truth in it. The tensions between settlers and native peoples were real and often violent. But the idea of standing by while a child drowned, regardless of his heritage, was unthinkable to her. "That would be monstrous," she said firmly. "A child is a child." When these words were translated, Wachiwi's face softened. She spoke again, this time directly to Sarah, as if knowing that even without understanding the specific words, Sarah would grasp her meaning. There was respect in her tone, and something else, an acknowledgement of a bond formed in crisis. "My mother asks if you would accept a gift," Swift Fox said. "It would honor us." Before Sarah could respond, Wachiwi was already removing something from around her neck, a small leather pouch suspended on a braided cord. She placed it in Sarah's hands, closing Sarah's fingers around it and speaking softly. "It is a medicine pouch," Swift Fox explained. "It contains sacred items for protection. My mother made it when Little Eagle was born. She says it will keep you safe, as you kept her son safe." Sarah was deeply moved by the significance of the gift. "Tell her I am honored," she said, carefully placing the cord around her neck. The pouch rested just below her collarbone, still warm from Wachiwi's body. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wachiwi nodded, satisfied, then spoke to her sons. Little Eagle reluctantly removed Sarah's shawl and returned it to her with a solemn bow. Swift Fox translated his brother's words. "He says the river spirit tried to take him because he disobeyed our mother and went to the water alone. He has learned his lesson." Sarah smiled at the boy. "Tell him I'm very glad he's safe now." After the translation, Little Eagle gave her a shy smile, then moved closer to his mother. Wachiwi spoke again, her tone questioning. "My mother asks if we may walk you back to your home," Swift Fox said. "The sun will set soon, and you are wet from the river." Sarah hadn't noticed how late it had grown. The afternoon was indeed waning, the shadows lengthening across the plains. Her wet clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, and she suddenly felt the exhaustion from her ordeal. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to take you from your path," she replied. "I live in Riverton, just a couple of miles back that way." Swift Fox conferred with his mother, then turned back to Sarah. "We are camped not far from there near Hawk's Bluff. It would honor us to ensure your safe return." Sarah realized that refusing their escort would be seen as rejecting their gratitude. "Then I would be grateful for your company," she said. They set off along the riverbank, Wachiwi and Little Eagle walking ahead, while Swift Fox fell into step beside Sarah. The young man seemed eager to practice his English, and Sarah found herself curious about their lives. "Does your family live near here?" she asked. "We are with our summer hunting camp," Swift Fox explained. "Many families from our band travel together. My grandfather, Rising Sun, leads us. In the winter, we stay near the agency. Sarah understood he was referring to the reservation agency. The government's policy of confining native peoples to reservations was, in her opinion, one of many cruel injustices inflicted upon the first inhabitants of this land. "Are you allowed to hunt freely?" she asked, knowing that many traditional practices were now restricted. Swift Fox's expression clouded. "We have permission for this hunt," he said carefully. "The agent gave papers to my grandfather. But the hunting grounds grow smaller each year, the buffalo are gone, and the deer are fewer." Sarah felt a familiar sense of shame at what her people had done to his. "I'm sorry," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. "You have nothing to be sorry for," Swift Fox replied with surprising gentleness. "You saved my brother. That makes you different." They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rustle of grass and the distant call of birds. Sarah's clothes were beginning to dry in the warm evening air, though her shoes squelched uncomfortably with each step. "May I ask you something?" Swift Fox said eventually. "Of course. Why did you come here to this place?" "Most white women stay in the big towns to the east." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I wanted to teach," she said, "and I wanted more than what was offered to me in Boston. Freedom, perhaps, a chance to be useful in a different way." Swift Fox nodded thoughtfully. "Freedom," he repeated. "My people understand this word very well. We once had it, and now we fight to keep what little remains." His words hung in the air between them, a simple truth that underscored the vast differences in their experiences. Yet in that moment, Sarah felt a connection that transcended those differences, a shared human yearning for self-determination. As they approached the outskirts of Riverton, Wachiwe and Little Eagle slowed, waiting for Sarah and Swift Fox to join them. The settlement was visible now, a collection of wooden buildings nestled against the backdrop of the plains, smoke rising from chimneys as evening meals were prepared. Wachiwe spoke to her son, her expression concerned. "My mother says it would be better if we do not enter your town," Swift Fox translated. "Some people there do not welcome us." Sarah understood immediately. Relations between the settlers and the Lakota were strained at best, openly hostile at worst. The presence of Lakota people in town might cause trouble that could fall hardest on Wachiwe and her sons. "I understand," she said. "My cabin is just there at the edge of town." She pointed to a small structure set apart from the main cluster of buildings. "Please thank your mother for her kindness and for the gift. I will treasure it." Swift Fox and translated, and Wachiwe stepped forward once more, taking Sarah's hands as she had done earlier. She spoke directly to Sarah, her words flowing with a musical cadence. "My mother says that our paths were meant to cross today," Swift Fox translated. "The Great Spirit placed you by the river at the right moment. She says that such things do not happen by chance." "Perhaps she's right," Sarah said, thinking of the seemingly random decision that had led her to walk so far downstream that afternoon. Wachiwe released Sarah's hands and spoke again, this time with a note of formality in her voice. "She says that Rising Sun, our grandfather and chief, will wish to thank you himself," Swift Fox said. "Our people do not forget those who help us, especially in these difficult times." Sarah nodded. "Please tell him I was only doing what any person with a heart would do." After Swift Fox translated, Wachiwe smiled and spoke once more, touching the medicine pouch now hanging around Sarah's neck. "She says to keep this close, and it will protect you from harm," Swift Fox said. "And she says that we will meet again." With those words, Wachiwe gestured to her sons. Little Eagle gave Sarah a shy wave, and Swift Fox nodded respectfully. Then they turned and walked away, following the river's edge until they disappeared into the gathering dusk. Sarah watched them go, one hand absently touching the small leather pouch at her throat. Something told her that Wachiwe was right. Their paths would cross again. What she couldn't know was how soon that meeting would come, or how it would change the course of her life forever. That night, as Sarah sat beside her small stove, her clothes and book drying nearby, she wrote in her journal about the day's events. She described Little Eagle's frightened eyes, Wachiwee's dignified gratitude, and Swift Fox's thoughtful questions. As she wrote, she found herself wondering about Rising Sun, the chief she had not met, grandfather to the boy she had pulled from the river. What kind of man was he? What would he think of a white woman saving his grandson? Sarah closed her journal and prepared for bed, unaware that 50 miles away, in a Lakota encampment beneath the stars, Rising Sun was already hearing the story of his grandson's rescue. Unaware that the elderly chief had fallen silent, his weathered face solemn as he contemplated what such an act meant in these times of conflict between his people and the whites, unaware that he had already made a decision that would bring him to her door within days. As she drifted off to sleep, the medicine pouch resting on the table beside her bed, Sarah Mitchell could not possibly imagine what awaited her. When the sun rose 4 days later, or how a simple act of human decency would forge an unexpected bond between two very different worlds. The next 3 days passed in quiet routine for Sarah. She tended her small garden, organized materials for the coming school year, and exchanged pleasantries with neighbors who stopped by. Few in Riverton knew about her encounter with Little Eagle and his family. Sarah had mentioned only that she'd gone for a walk along the river, deliberately omitting the rescue. Something told her the townspeople might not share her view that a child is a child, regardless of heritage. On the morning of the 4th day after the rescue, Sarah woke to the sound of a woodpecker drumming against a nearby tree. Sunlight streamed through her window as she prepared a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee. The medicine pouch Wachiwee had given her hung on a nail by her bed. Each morning, Sarah found herself touching it briefly before starting her day, a habit formed without conscious thought. She was washing her breakfast dishes when the sound of hoofbeats reached her ears. Not the familiar clip-clop of settlers' horses pulling wagons into town, but something different. Many horses moving at an unhurried pace. Sarah dried her hands on her apron and stepped onto her small porch. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Approaching her cabin from the direction of the river was a procession unlike anything she had ever witnessed. 50 Lakota warriors on horseback moved in formation across the open ground that separated the settlement from the river. Their horses, paint ponies in a variety of colors, were adorned with symbols painted on their flanks. The riders sat tall and proud, some carrying traditional shields and lances decorated with eagle feathers, others with Winchester rifles resting across their saddles. At their head rode an elderly man on a magnificent white horse. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the dignity in his bearing. His long white hair was braided with strips of red cloth, and a single eagle feather stood upright at the back of his head. He wore a ceremonial breastplate of bone hair pipes over a fringed buckskin shirt, and his face was painted with red and black stripes. Behind the warriors came several women on horseback, including, Sarah realized with a start, Wachiwee. Riding. Before her on the same horse was Little Eagle, his small face alight with excitement. The town of Riverton was already stirring with alarm. Sarah could hear shouts from the main street. Doors slammed as people rushed to see what was happening. A bell began to ring, the same bell that warned of prairie fires or other dangers. Sarah stood frozen on her porch as the procession came to a halt about 50 yards from her cabin. The old man on the white horse raised his hand, and the column stopped moving with remarkable precision. For a long moment no one moved. The Lakota warriors sat silently on their mounts, gazing steadily at the gathering townspeople. Sheriff Tom Wallace emerged from his office, rifle in hand, followed by several men similarly armed. Sarah felt a surge of panic. This confrontation could turn deadly in an instant. Without stopping to consider the consequences, she stepped off her porch and walked forward, placing herself deliberately between the townspeople and the Lakota procession. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her steps measured and calm. "Miss Mitchell, get back to your cabin right now," Sheriff Wallace called out, his voice tight with tension. Sarah ignored him, continuing to walk until she stood in the open ground between the two groups. She turned first to face the Lakota riders. The old man on the white horse regarded her with piercing black eyes. With a slight nod, he dismounted with surprising agility for his age. Two younger warriors immediately moved to flank him, but he waved them back with a gesture that brooked no argument. From behind him, Swift Fox emerged, dismounting from his own pony. He approached and stood beside the old man, ready to translate. "My grandfather, Chief Rising Sun of the Miniconjou Lakota, wishes to speak with the woman called Sarah Mitchell," Swift Fox announced, his voice carrying clearly across the open space. Before Sarah could respond, Sheriff Wallace strode forward, positioning himself slightly in front of her. "This is private property and you folks have no permission to be here," he said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "I'm going to have to ask you to turn around and head back to the reservation." Swift Fox translated these words to Rising Sun, whose expression remained impassive. The chief spoke in response, his voice deep and resonant despite his age. "My grandfather says we have not come to make trouble," Swift Fox translated. "We have come to honor a debt to this woman who saved the life of his grandson. He asks that you step aside and allow him to speak with her directly." More townspeople had gathered now, watching the exchange, with expressions ranging from fear to outright hostility. Sarah could feel the tension building like a thunderstorm. "It's all right, Sheriff," she said firmly. 3 days ago, I pulled her child from the river, Chief Rising Sun's grandson. These people mean no harm." Sheriff Wallace turned to her, disbelief evident on his weathered face. "You helped them, and didn't think to mention it?" "I helped a drowning child," Sarah replied evenly. "That's all that matters." Wallace looked from Sarah to the assembled warriors and back again. After a long moment, he lowered his hand from his weapon, though he didn't step aside. "Any funny business, and we won't hesitate to defend our town," he warned. Rising Sun, seeming to understand the sentiment, if not the exact words, nodded once in acknowledgement. Then he spoke again to Swift Fox, who translated, "My grandfather asked permission to approach Sarah Mitchell and fulfill the sacred obligation of gratitude." Sarah nodded her assent, and Rising Sun walked forward with measured steps. Close up, she could see the deep lines etched into his face, a map of a long life filled with both wisdom and hardship. His eyes, though, were clear and sharp, missing nothing. He stopped before her and raised his hand in greeting. "How, Sarah Mitchell," he said, one of the few English words he knew. "Hello, Chief Rising Sun," she replied, instinctively mirroring his gesture of respect. The chief's gaze fell to her neck, where the medicine pouch should have been. Understanding his unspoken question, Sarah explained, "It's safe in my home. I treasure Wachewee's gift." After Swift Fox translated, Rising Sun nodded, pleased. He then began to speak in Lakota, his words measured and formal. Sarah listened to the rhythm of his speech, watching his expressions, though she couldn't understand the words themselves. When he finished, Swift Fox translated, "My grandfather says that among our people there is no greater act than saving a child's life. When that act comes from someone not of our blood, it carries even more significance. He has come today with the warriors of our band to honor you and to offer gifts in recognition of what you have done." Rising Sun gestured, and two of the women, riders, dismounted, leading forward a painted pony, a beautiful mare with a coat of reddish-brown dappled with white spots. The animal was adorned with a finely crafted saddle and beaded bridle. "This is Storm Dancer," Swift Fox translated as Rising Sun spoke again. "She is one of my grandfather's finest horses, bred from his personal herd. He offers her to you as a token of his gratitude." Sarah was stunned by the generosity of the gift. A horse of this quality represented significant wealth among the Lakota. "I'm deeply honored," she said, "but I couldn't possibly." Rising Sun held up his hand, interrupting her refusal before Swift Fox could even translate it. He spoke again, his tone brooking no argument. "My grandfather says that to refuse would be to dishonor both him and the act that brought us here," Swift Fox translated. "Storm Dancer is yours. She will carry you safely wherever you wish to go." Understanding that refusal would be an insult, Sarah nodded her acceptance. "Please tell your grandfather that I accept his generous gift with a grateful heart." When these words were translated, Rising Sun's stern expression softened slightly. He spoke again, this time directing Swift Fox to translate for all to hear. "My grandfather wishes to speak to everyone gathered here," Swift Fox announced, turning to address both Sarah and the townspeople who had assembled at a cautious distance. "4 days ago, this woman did what many others would not," Swift Fox translated as Rising Sun spoke, gesturing toward Sarah. "She saw not a Lakota child in the river, but simply a child in danger. Without thought for herself, she entered the water and fought the current to bring my grandson safely to shore. In doing so, she preserved not just a life, but a piece of a future." Rising Sun paused, sweeping his gaze across the gathered settlers who had fallen silent in the face of his dignity and obvious authority. "There has been much blood between our peoples," the translation continued, "much sorrow on both sides. The white man's way has changed the face of our lands forever. But today I am reminded that even in these dark times there can be light. One person choosing to see beyond the differences that divide us." Rising Sun turned his attention back to Sarah, speaking directly to her now. "From this day forward, you will be known among my people as Mani Wikoni, Water of Life. You are welcome in our camps and our councils. No Lakota will ever raise a hand against you. This I declare as chief of the Miniconju." To seal this declaration, Rising Sun removed a necklace from around his own neck, an intricate piece made of porcupine quills, dyed in vibrant colors and arranged in a geometric pattern, with a polished buffalo horn pendant at its center. He placed it carefully over Sarah's head, the pendant resting against her chest. "This has been worn by the chiefs of my family for 4 generations, Swift Fox translated. "It carries the protection of our ancestors. Wear it when you travel, and all native peoples will know you as a friend of the Lakota." Sarah was overwhelmed by the significance of the gesture. "I will wear it with honor," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "and I will strive to be worthy of the name you have given me." After Swift Fox translated her words, Rising Sun nodded, satisfied. Then, to Sarah's surprise, he turned to address Sheriff Wallace and the townspeople directly. "My grandfather has words for you as well," Swift Fox announced. The settlers shifted uneasily, but no one spoke as Rising Sun delivered his message, his voice carrying across the open ground. "The woman you call Sarah Mitchell has shown courage and compassion that honors your people," Swift Fox translated. "In her actions I see hope for a different path than the one we have walked these many years. I ask that you recognize what she has done, not just for my grandson, but for all of us who seek peace in these troubled times." Sheriff Wallace stood stiffly, his expression guarded, but he gave a curt nod in acknowledgement of the chief's words. Rising Sun spoke a few more words, which Swift Fox translated as, "Remember this day. Remember that it took only one person to build a bridge between our worlds." With that, Rising Sun raised his hand in a gesture of farewell to Sarah. "Toksha ake wansin yankin." "Gatilo," he said. Swift Fox translated, "I shall see you again." The chief turned and walked back to his white horse, mounting with the same surprising agility he had shown earlier. At his signal, the Lakota women brought Storm Dancer forward, leading the mare to Sarah. "She is gentle but spirited," Swift Fox told Sarah quietly. "She will serve you well." Sarah reached out tentatively to stroke the horse's velvet nose. Storm Dancer whickered softly, seeming to accept her new owner. Rising Sun raised his hand one final time. As one, the 50 warriors turned their mounts and began to ride away, moving with the same disciplined formation with which they had arrived. The women followed, including Wachiwi, who caught Sarah's eye and touched her hand to her heart in a gesture of connection. Little Eagle, riding before his mother, turned back and waved enthusiastically. Sarah waved in return, watching as the impressive procession made its way back toward the river. Only Swift Fox remained behind for a moment. "My grandfather has honored you greatly today," he said quietly. "No white person has ever received such gifts from him." "I understand the significance," Sarah replied. "Please tell him that I will never forget this day." Swift Fox nodded. "There is something more you should know," he added, lowering his voice further. "My grandfather rarely leaves our hunting grounds to enter white settlements. The last time was 5 years ago when he signed the treaty that placed our people on the reservation. Today, he chose to come here into what he sees as hostile territory to honor you. That shows the depth of his respect." Sarah felt the weight of this information. "I'm humbled by his trust," she said. Swift Fox smiled slightly. "It is not just trust. It is hope. Hope that others might learn from your example." He glanced toward the townspeople, who were still watching with suspicious eyes. "Though that may be asking too much." "Change comes slowly," Sarah acknowledged. "But it does come, one person at a time." "Perhaps." Swift Fox didn't sound convinced. "I must join my family now. Storm Dancer knows the way to our summer camp. Should you wish to visit, you would be welcome." With that, he mounted his pony and rode after the others, leaving Sarah standing alone with her new horse and the astonished residents of Riverton. "Sheriff." Wallace approached, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Miss Mitchell, I hope you know what you're doing," he said quietly. "Folks aren't going to take kindly to you being so friendly with the Lakota." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I pulled a drowning child from the river, Sheriff. Would you have done differently?" Wallace had the grace to look uncomfortable. "No, I suppose not. But accepting gifts, taking a name among them, that's different." "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Or is it simply acknowledging our common humanity?" The sheriff had no answer for that. He tipped his hat and walked away, herding the curious townspeople back toward the main street. Sarah could hear the murmurs already, starting, speculation and judgment that would likely make her position in Riverton more difficult in the days to come. But as she stood there with Storm Dancer's reins in her hand and Rising Sun's necklace around her neck, Sarah found she didn't regret her actions. Not the impulsive dive into the river 4 days ago, and not her acceptance of the Lakota's gratitude today. She led Storm Dancer toward the small corral behind her cabin, noticing how the mare moved with elegant precision. A gift fit for a chief's daughter, not a schoolteacher from Boston. The thought brought a smile to her face. As she settled the horse into the corral with fresh water and hay, Sarah caught sight of Wachiwi's medicine pouch hanging just inside her cabin window. She went inside and retrieved it, placing it around her neck alongside Rising Sun's necklace. The two gifts, one simple and personal, one grand and ceremonial, seemed to complement each other perfectly. Sarah stood on her porch looking out, toward the river where her unexpected journey had begun. In the distance, she could just make out the Lakota procession disappearing into the tree line along the water's edge. Something had changed today, not just in how the town would see her, but in how she saw herself and her place in this contested land. She touched the buffalo horn pendant at her throat. Mni Wikoni, Water of Life. A new name, carrying both honor and responsibility. In saving Little Eagle, she had inadvertently created a connection between two worlds that rarely intersected except in conflict. What that connection might mean for her future, she couldn't begin to guess. One thing was certain: the life she had envisioned for herself when she left Boston had just expanded in ways she could never have anticipated. As the summer breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and prairie grass to her porch, Sarah Mitchell, now also Minnie Wicconi, found herself looking forward to whatever might come next, with a sense of curiosity and purpose that felt both frightening and exhilarating. Behind her in the corral, Storm Dancer whinnied softly, as if in agreement with her unspoken thoughts. A bridge between worlds, Rising Sun had called her. Perhaps it was time to see where that bridge might lead. Word of the Lakota. Processions spread through Riverton like wildfire. By evening, Sarah had received 3 visitors, all women she'd considered friends, who came with thinly veiled concerns about her association with savages. Each time, Sarah calmly recounted the simple truth. She had saved a drowning child, and his family had expressed their gratitude. Nothing more, nothing less. The 4th visitor arrived as twilight settled over the plains. Jacob Miller, the owner of Riverton's general store and chairman of the school board, knocked firmly on her door. His round face was flushed. Whether from the evening heat or from agitation, Sarah couldn't tell. "Miss Mitchell," he began without preamble, "there's been some discussion among the board members about today's incident." Sarah gestured for him to enter, but Miller remained on the porch, glancing nervously at Storm Dancer in the corral. "I've come to inform you that we'll be holding an emergency meeting tomorrow morning to discuss your position at the school," he continued. "In light of certain concerns about your judgment and the example you're setting for our children." Sarah felt a chill despite the warm evening. My judgment in saving a drowning child? Or my judgment in accepting the gratitude of his family? Miller shifted uncomfortably. "You know very well what I mean, Miss Mitchell. Taking gifts from the Lakota, wearing their trinkets." His eyes flicked to the necklace she still wore. "It sends the wrong message to impressionable young minds." "And what message would that be, Mr. Miller?" Sarah asked quietly. "That compassion knows no boundaries. That gratitude is a universal language." "Don't play innocent," Miller snapped, his composure slipping. "You've aligned yourself with the very people who terrorized settlers not 10 years ago. People who killed women and children. My own brother died at Little Bighorn." Sarah took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I'm truly sorry about your brother, Mr. Miller, but the child I saved had nothing to do with that. He's just a boy, no different from any child in Riverton." Miller's jaw tightened. "The meeting is at 9 o'clock. I suggest you consider carefully how you explain your actions to the board." With that, he turned and stalked away, his back rigid with disapproval. Sarah closed her door slowly, leaning against it as the implications sank in. She had known there might be consequences, but the speed with which her position had been jeopardized took her by surprise. After all, what had she done but show basic human decency? She crossed to her small desk and lit the lamp, then took out a fresh sheet of paper. If she was to defend herself tomorrow, she would need to organize her thoughts. As she dipped her pen in ink, a movement outside her window caught her eye. A figure stood at the edge of her property, partially concealed by the growing darkness. For a moment, fear flickered through her. Had someone come to intimidate her further? Then the figure stepped forward into the pool of light cast by her window, and she recognized Swift Fox. Sarah hurried to the door. "What are you doing here?" she asked, glancing nervously toward town. "It's not safe for you after dark." "I had to warn you," Swift Fox said quietly. "There is trouble coming." Sarah ushered him inside quickly, closing the door behind him. "In The lamplight, she could see the concern etched on his young face. "What kind of trouble?" she asked, offering him a chair at her small table. Swift Fox remained standing. "2 men from your town rode to Fort Robinson this afternoon. They claimed that Lakota warriors had threatened the settlement. They're bringing soldiers." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "That's a lie. Your grandfather came in peace." "Truth matters little to some men," Swift Fox replied grimly. "They saw 50 warriors and decided we must be planning war." "When will the soldiers come?" "Tomorrow, perhaps the next day. My father followed the men part of the way." Swift Fox hesitated. "My grandfather sent me to bring you to our camp tonight. He says you will not be safe here once the soldiers arrive." Sarah's mind raced. "Not safe? But I've done nothing wrong." "You stood between 2 peoples today," Swift Fox said simply. "Those who hate choose sides. They will say you have chosen ours." The truth of his words struck her forcefully. Already the school board was questioning her position. If soldiers came looking for trouble with the Lakota, anyone seen as sympathetic might indeed be at risk. But to flee in the night, to abandon her home, her position, everything she had built here. "I can't just leave," she said, gesturing around her small cabin. "This is my life, my work." Swift Fox's expression softened slightly. "My grandfather said you would say this. He told me to remind you that a life saved creates a bond that cannot be broken. Our people are now responsible for your safety, as you were responsible for Little Eagle's." Sarah touched the necklace at her throat, feeling the smooth contours of the buffalo horn pendant. Rising Sun had called her a bridge between worlds. Perhaps this was what that truly meant, not standing safely on either shore, but suspended between, belonging fully to neither. "The school board is meeting tomorrow to decide whether to dismiss me," she said finally. "I should at least face them, explain my actions." Swift Fox shook his head. "By tomorrow the soldiers may already be here. They will not listen to explanations." A memory surfaced. Sarah's father speaking of the massacre at Wounded Knee just months ago. Over 150 Lakota men, women and children killed by the 7th Cavalry. The newspapers had called it a battle, but her father, a physician who had treated survivors, had called it by its true name, slaughter. "What would happen to your people if soldiers came looking for trouble?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "My grandfather is wise," Swift Fox replied. "He would avoid fighting if possible, but soldiers do not always give that choice." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders. If violence erupted because of today's peaceful visit, could she live with that knowledge? She looked around her small cabin one more time, then made her decision. "I'll need a few minutes to gather some things." Swift Fox nodded, relief evident in his expression. "I will wait by the trees with Storm Dancer." After he slipped out, Sarah moved quickly, filling a small traveling bag with essentials, a change of clothes, her journal, a few personal items. She hesitated over her mother's silver hairbrush, then packed it too. On impulse, she took the letter of appointment from the school board and the small Bible her father had given her when she left Boston. She penned a brief note to her neighbor, Martha Williams, asking her to look after the cabin in her absence. She didn't explain where she was going. Better that Martha couldn't tell what she didn't know. With a last glance around the place that had been her home for nearly a year, Sarah extinguished the lamp and stepped out into the night. Swift Fox had already saddled Storm Dancer and waited at the edge of the property, his own pony ground tethered nearby. Without a word, he helped Sarah mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "We will travel along the river," he said quietly. "It is longer but safer." They rode in silence, keeping to the shadows where possible. Sarah's heart pounded with each hoofbeat, half expecting to hear shouts of discovery from town, but Riverton slept on, unaware of her departure. Once they reached the river, Swift Fox set a faster pace. Storm Dancer moved with remarkable responsiveness, seeming to anticipate Sarah's commands before she gave them. Despite the circumstances, she found herself appreciating the mare's smooth gait and intelligence. "Your grandfather chose well," she remarked softly as they rode side by side along a stretch of open ground. "She's magnificent." Swift Fox nodded. "Storm Dancer comes from a line bred by my grandfather's father. It is said they can run all day without tiring and find water in the driest places." "How far is your camp?" Sarah asked, realizing she had no idea where the Lakota was staying. "We will reach it before dawn," Swift Fox replied. "It lies near Hawk's Bluff, in a hidden valley that white settlers rarely visit." They rode through the night, stopping occasionally to rest the horses and drink from the river. Swift Fox moved with absolute confidence through the darkness, finding paths Sarah would never have seen. The moon rose, casting silver light across the plains, and for brief moments Sarah forgot the circumstances of their journey, simply marveling at the beauty of the land by night. As they traveled, Swift Fox told her stories of the places they passed: a hill where his people had hunted buffalo in his grandfather's youth, a stand of trees where medicinal plants grew, a rock formation that resembled a sleeping bear. Through his words, Sarah began to see the landscape differently, not as empty wilderness waiting to be claimed, but as a living history book, filled with meaning and memory. "My people do not own the land," Swift Fox explained when she asked. "About territories and boundaries. We belong to it, as the eagle belongs to the sky or the fish to the river. The white man's way of drawing lines on paper and saying, 'This is mine,' makes no more sense to us than trying to own the wind." Sarah thought about the deeds and property claims that formed the foundation of settlement life. "I never considered it that way before. There are many things your people and mine see differently," Swift Fox replied, without rancor. "But sometimes, as with you and Little Eagle, we can see past those differences to what matters most." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when they crested a rise, and Swift Fox pointed to a valley below. "We are here." In the pre-dawn light, Sarah could make out the shapes of teepees arranged in a circle near a small creek that fed into the Missouri. Smoke rose from morning cooking fires, and a few figures moved about the camp, beginning the day's activities. As they descended into the valley, a sentry spotted them and called out. Swift Fox answered in Lakota, and they were allowed to pass without challenge. Sarah felt curious eyes following her as they rode into the heart of the camp. Outside, the largest teepee, decorated with painted symbols Sarah couldn't interpret, Rising Sun stood waiting. Despite the early hour, he was fully dressed in the same ceremonial clothing he had worn the previous day. Sarah wondered if he had been awaiting their arrival all night. When she dismounted, the elderly chief greeted her with the same dignified gesture he had used in Riverton. "How many Wiconi?" he said, using the Lakota name he had given her. "Thank you for the warning," Sarah said, gesturing back toward the direction of Riverton, "and for offering me sanctuary." Swift Fox translated, and Rising Sun nodded gravely. He spoke at length, his deep voice carrying in the still morning air. "My grandfather says you have chosen wisely," Swift Fox translated. "The soldiers who come will bring with them the seeds of conflict. It is better that you are not there when they arrive." "How long must I stay away?" Sarah asked, thinking of her responsibilities, her life in Riverton. Rising Sun seemed to understand her concern even before Swift Fox translated. He replied with a few measured words. "Until the dust settles," Swift Fox interpreted. "A few days, perhaps longer." Rising Sun spoke again, this time gesturing toward a smaller tipi not far from his own. "He says that Wachawi has prepared a place for you to rest. After you have slept, there will be food, and we will speak more of what is to come." Only then did Sarah realize how exhausted she was from the night's journey. She nodded gratefully and allowed herself to be led to the teepee Swift Fox had indicated. Inside, she found clean furs arranged as a sleeping pallet and a small fire burning in the central pit, warming the space against the pre-dawn chill. Wachiwi appeared at the entrance, smiling in welcome. Though they shared no common language, the woman's gestures were clear. She showed Sarah where to place her bag, brought her a container of fresh water, and mimed sleeping. Before leaving, Wachiwi touched her own chest, then Sarah's, a simple gesture of connection that transcended words. Alone in the teepee, Sarah removed her boots and outer clothing, then lay down on the surprisingly comfortable furs. Despite the strangeness of her surroundings and the uncertainty of her situation, fatigue overcame her quickly. Her last conscious thought was of the irony. She had come west, seeking adventure and new experiences, and now found herself in circumstances far beyond anything she could have imagined. She woke to the sounds of children laughing and the smell of cooking food. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day and night came rushing back. Sarah sat up, noting that someone, Wachiwi presumably, had left a container of water, a soft deerskin cloth, and a bundle of folded material beside her sleeping pallet. She washed her face and hands, then examined the bundle. It contained a simple dress made of soft-tanned buckskin, decorated with subtle beadwork along the neckline and hem. Sarah hesitated, then changed into it, finding that it fit surprisingly well. Whether this was coincidence or Wachiwi's good eye for measurement, she couldn't guess. Outside, the camp was alive with activity. Women worked at cooking fires or scraped hides stretched on frames. Men sat in groups, repairing weapons or discussing matters in low voices. Children played games, darting between the teepees with the universal energy of youth. Little Eagle spotted her almost immediately, running over with an excited expression. He spoke rapidly in Lakota, gesturing for her to follow him. "He wants to show you something," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Swift Fox approaching, looking more rested than he had during their nighttime journey. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Or is it afternoon?" "Midday," he confirmed with a slight smile. "You slept long, but that was expected. The ride was not easy for someone unused to it." Sarah found herself returning his smile. "I'll admit I'm feeling it in muscles I didn't know I had." Little Eagle tugged impatiently at her hand, still chattering in his native tongue. "My brother is very excited to have you here," Swift Fox explained. "He has been telling everyone how you pulled him from the great water spirit's grasp." As they walked through the camp, following Little Eagle's lead, Sarah noticed the reactions of the Lakota people. Some nodded respectfully, others watched with undisguised curiosity, but none showed hostility. She wondered how much they knew about her, whether they saw her merely as the woman who had saved their chief's grandson, or as something more complex. Little Eagle led them to a group of children gathered around an elderly woman seated on a buffalo robe outside her teepee. The woman's face was deeply lined, her hair completely white, but her eyes were bright and alert. She was speaking to the children, who listened with rapt attention. "That is my grandmother, Mapia," Swift Fox said quietly. "She is telling the children stories of the old days before the white man came. Would she mind if we listened?" Sarah asked, fascinated by the scene. Swift Fox translated the question, and Mapia looked up, studying Sarah intently before breaking into a toothless smile. She patted the robe beside her, a clear invitation. Sarah sat down, conscious of the children's curious stares. Little Eagle plopped down directly in front of her, clearly proud to be connected to this unusual visitor. Mapia spoke, her voice surprisingly strong for one of her advanced years. "My grandmother welcomes you," Swift Fox translated. "She says that any friend of the water is a friend of our people." Sarah inclined her head respectfully. "Please tell her I am honored to be here." After Swift Fox relayed her words, Mapia continued speaking, now addressing both Sarah and the children. Swift Fox translated in a low voice. Long ago, when the buffalo were many and our people roamed freely across the plains, there was a young woman of our tribe who was known for her kindness to all living things. One day, while gathering plants by the river, she heard a cry for help. Without hesitation, she plunged into the water and rescued a snake that was being swept away by the current. The children listened intently, occasionally glancing at Sarah, as if comparing her to the woman in the story. Her friends warned her against helping a snake, saying it might bite her once saved. But the young woman replied, "I cannot ignore any creature in need, even those others fear." The snake did not bite her, but instead transformed into a powerful spirit who granted her the gift of healing. From that day forward, she became a great medicine woman who could cure any illness by using the water's power. Mapia looked directly at Sarah as Swift Fox translated the conclusion of the tale. The spirit told her, "You saw beyond appearances to the true nature of life. This wisdom is the greatest medicine of all." Sarah understood the purpose of the story. It was both welcome and instruction, wrapped in traditional narrative. Mapia was telling her that her action had meaning within the Lakota worldview, that saving Little Eagle connected to ancient values her people held dear. "Thank you for sharing this wisdom," Sarah said when Swift Fox had translated her words. "I have much to learn from your people." Mapia nodded, seemingly satisfied, then returned her attention to the children, beginning another story. Sarah and Swift Fox moved away, leaving Little Eagle still absorbed in his grandmother's tales. "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman," Sarah commented as they walked. "She has seen much in her lifetime," Swift Fox replied. "She remembers when the buffalo herds were so vast they took days to pass. She has watched our way of life change beyond recognition." "It must be very difficult for her," Sarah said softly. Swift Fox was quiet for a moment. "She says that the greatest strength is to bend without breaking, like the willow tree in a storm. Our people must adapt to survive, but we need not lose what makes us Lakota." As they reached the center of the camp, Rising Sun emerged from his teepee, accompanied by several other men who appeared to be elders or leaders within the band. He beckoned to them, and Swift Fox led Sarah forward. "My grandfather wishes to discuss what happened after we left Riverton," he explained, "and what may come next." The council gathered in Rising Sun's teepee was composed of 7 men, each wearing expressions of grave concern. Sarah sat cross-legged on a buffalo robe beside Swift Fox, who would translate the proceedings. A small fire burned in the center, its smoke rising through the opening at the top of the teepee. Rising Sun began by introducing each man present. Black Hawk, a war chief with penetrating eyes. Lone Wolf, a medicine man whose face was painted with yellow stripes. Eagle Feather, an elderly hunter known for his wisdom. Gray Horse, whose scarred face spoke of battles survived. And 2 younger men, Running Elk and Iron Eyes, who Sarah guessed were rising leaders in the band. "These men form the council that guides our people," Swift Fox explained. "They have gathered to discuss the danger that now threatens both you and us." Rising Sun spoke, his deep voice filling the teepee. The other men listened in silence, occasionally nodding in agreement. "My grandfather says that scouts have confirmed what we feared," Swift Fox translated. 20 soldiers from Fort Robinson are riding toward Riverton, led by Lieutenant Clark. They will arrive by sunset today. "How do you know their intentions?" Sarah asked. The question was translated, and Black Hawk responded, his voice sharp and clipped. "Black Hawk says the soldiers are always looking for reasons to fight," Swift Fox translated. "They need only the rumor of Lakota warriors to rouse their blood." Eagle Feather spoke next, his words measured and thoughtful. "Eagle Feather believes that the soldiers will first speak with the people of Riverton, Swift Fox said. They will hear many versions of what happened yesterday. Some will speak of peaceful ceremony, others of threatening invasion. I could go back, Sarah suggested. Explain that everything was peaceful, that there was no threat. When this was translated, the men exchanged glances. Lone Wolf shook his head and spoke, his voice carrying the rhythm of a practiced storyteller. Lone Wolf says your words would be drowned by those who wish to see conflict, Swift Fox translated. The soldiers will not believe a woman who wears Lakota clothing and speaks of friendship with savages. They might even arrest you as a collaborator. Sarah touched the necklace Rising Sun had given her, still around her neck. Then what can be done? Rising Sun answered, speaking at length while the others listened respectfully. My grandfather says our band must move deeper into the hills, Swift Fox translated. We are officially permitted to hunt here, but the soldiers will not care about papers from the agency. If they find us, they will force us back to the reservation, using violence if we resist. And me? Sarah asked quietly. Rising Sun's expression softened slightly as he responded. You have 3 paths before you, came the translation. You can return to Riverton and face whatever awaits there. You can travel with us to our winter grounds, where you would be welcome. Or you can journey to the larger settlement at Fort Pierre, where the presence of many witnesses might protect you from false accusations. Sarah considered her options. Returning to Riverton meant facing not only the school board, but potentially hostile soldiers. Traveling with the Lakota would mean abandoning her profession and the life she had built. Fort Pierre offered a path. She could perhaps find work there, start fresh, without fully leaving white society. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The camp begins moving at dawn tomorrow. Swift Fox translated Rising Sun's answer. You must choose your path by then. Grey Horse, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who had known hardship. Grey Horse says that whatever you choose, the path will not be easy, Swift Fox translated. The world is changing for all of us. The old boundaries between our peoples are breaking down, but the new ways are not yet clear. Rising Sun added something, looking directly at Sarah. My grandfather says that in saving Little Eagle, you stepped into a space between worlds, Swift Fox said. Such a position carries both power and danger. The council concluded with practical matters, the route the band would take into the hills, how to transport their supplies, who would serve as scouts to watch for the soldiers. Throughout these discussions, Sarah sat quietly, absorbing the reality of what was happening. These people were being forced to flee their hunting grounds because they had come to honor her. As the council dispersed, Rising Sun asked Sarah to remain. When they were alone except for Swift Fox, the chief spoke more personally. My grandfather wishes you to know that your presence has brought both joy and difficulty to our band. Swift Fox translated, joy because it reminded us that not all white people seek our destruction. Difficulty because it has drawn unwanted attention. I never meant to cause trouble, Sarah said softly. Rising Sun nodded, speaking again. He says that intention matters less than outcome in the world of men, Swift Fox translated. A good heart can still lead to suffering, just as a storm brings both needed rain and destructive floods. What would you advise me to do? Sarah asked directly. Rising Sun considered for a long moment before answering. My grandfather says he cannot choose your path for you, Swift Fox translated. But he believes you were brought to us for a purpose that is still unfolding. He says the spirits rarely act without reason. With that cryptic statement, Rising Sun indicated that their conversation was at an end. He touched his hand to Sarah's shoulder briefly, a gesture of blessing or support, before leaving the tipi. Outside, the camp was already preparing for departure. Women were dismantling tipis not currently in use, packing belongings onto travois that would be pulled by horses. Men were gathering hunting equipment and weapons, while children helped where they could, all under the watchful eyes of the elderly. "It's remarkable how quickly everyone can mobilize," Sarah commented to Swift Fox as they walked through the activity. "We have had much practice," he replied with a hint of bitterness. "My people have been forced to move many times in recent years. We adapt or we perish." Wachiwi approached, carrying a bundle of clothing. Through Swift Fox, she explained that she had brought additional garments for Sarah, practical items for traveling, regardless of which path she chose. The generosity brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Please thank her," she told Swift Fox. "Her kindness means more than I can express." As the day progressed, Sarah observed the Lakota preparations with growing admiration for their efficiency and communal spirit. Everyone contributed according to their abilities, from the youngest children to the eldest grandparents. There was none of the chaos or complaint that might have accompanied such a sudden relocation among settlers. Little Eagle found her in the afternoon, proudly showing off a small bow his father had made him. Through gestures and Swift Fox's occasional translation, he demonstrated how he was learning to hunt small game. His resilience amazed Sarah. This was a child who had nearly drowned days ago and now faced displacement from his home, yet he remained curious and joyful. As evening approached, a scout rode into camp with news. The soldiers had indeed reached Riverton. Through Swift Fox, Sarah learned that they were questioning townspeople about the Lakota invasion and had been particularly interested in her whereabouts. "They searched your cabin," Swift Fox translated the scout's report. "When they found it empty, the lieutenant was angry. He has ordered his men to remain in town overnight and begin searching the surrounding area at dawn." The news cemented Sarah's decision. She could not return to Riverton now, not with soldiers actively looking for her, potentially as a collaborator. With the Lakota, Fort Pierre remained a possibility, but it was several days' journey, and she would need to travel alone through territory now being searched by the military. She found Rising Sun conferring with Black Hawk near the edge of camp. The men paused their conversation as she approached. "I've made my decision," she said, meeting the chief's steady gaze. "I will travel with your people, at least until it's safe to consider other options." Swift Fox translated, and Rising Sun nodded solemnly. He spoke briefly in response. "My grandfather says you honor us with your trust," Swift Fox translated. "He promises that as long as you travel with our band, you will be protected as one of our own." Black Hawk added something, his expression still stern, but with a hint of respect. "Black Hawk says that the woman who entered the river without fear will find courage for this new journey as well," Swift Fox said. That evening, as darkness fell over the camp, Wachiwi invited Sarah to join her family for the evening meal. In a teepee that would be dismantled before dawn, Sarah sat with Wachiwi, her husband, 2 bears, Swift Fox, Little Eagle, and Mapia, the elderly grandmother. The food was simple but nourishing: buffalo meat prepared with wild onions, dried berries, and a soup made from roots and herbs Sarah didn't recognize. They ate mostly in silence, the universal language of shared meals transcending the verbal barriers between them. After they had finished, 2 bears, a quiet, dignified man who had been introduced as Rising Sun's son, spoke for the first time, directly to Sarah. Swift Fox translated his father's words. "My father says that when the soldiers search for us tomorrow, they will find only cold ashes where our fires burned. Our people know how to move without leaving clear trails. But he is concerned about you, Hemniwikoni. You are not trained in our ways of stealth." "I'll learn quickly," Sarah promised. "I won't slow you down or endanger your people." 2 bears nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response. He spoke again, this time at greater length. "He says that tomorrow you will ride with our family," Swift Fox translated. "Storm Dancer is a good horse who knows how to move quietly. My Father will show you how to guide her through difficult terrain without leaving obvious signs. Mapia spoke then, her wizened hands gesturing as if weaving something invisible. My grandmother says that the spirits who guide the water also guide those who respect it, Swift Fox translated. She believes you already carry protection that will help you on this journey. Sarah touched the medicine pouch Wachiwi had given. The day she saved Little Eagle, now hanging alongside Rising Sun's necklace. The physical connection to that moment reminded her of how quickly life could change course, like a river suddenly diverted by a fallen tree or shifted stones. After the meal, Sarah returned to the teepee she had been given for her brief stay. It would be among the last dismantled in the morning. She sat on the sleeping furs, contemplating the decision she had made. Was she acting rashly, throwing away her career and position on an impulse? Or was she following a deeper calling, one that transcended the narrow confines of the life she had planned? She took out her journal and wrote by the light of a small fire, recording the events of the past 2 days with as much detail as she could manage. If nothing else, she wanted a record of this extraordinary turn in her life's path, something to remind her future self that this had indeed happened. A soft sound at the tipi entrance interrupted her writing. "Yes?" she called. Swift Fox ducked, inside, carrying something wrapped in a piece of hide. "I thought you might want this for your journey," he said, unwrapping the bundle to reveal a knife in a beaded sheath. "The trail ahead may present challenges." Sarah accepted the gift, noting the fine craftsmanship of both the blade and its decorative casing. "Thank you. Did you make this?" "The knife was my first hunting blade," he explained. "I've since crafted a new one. The sheath was made by my mother last winter." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork. "I'm honored." Swift Fox hesitated, then spoke again. "There is something else you should know before tomorrow." "What is it?" "The path we will take leads through places sacred to our people," he said. "Places not meant for outsiders. Some of the elders were concerned about bringing you there." "I understand," Sarah replied. "I would never want to intrude on sacred matters." "Rising Sun spoke for you," Swift Fox continued. "He said that by saving Little Eagle, you had earned the right to see these places. But there may be ceremonies or locations you will not be permitted to witness. This is not personal. It is our way." "Of course," Sarah assured him. "I respect your traditions and boundaries. I'm grateful just to be allowed to travel with you." Swift Fox nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. "We leave before first light. I will come to guide you when it's time." After he left, Sarah returned to her journal, adding this new information. She had studied accounts of native cultures during her education in Boston, but those academic perspectives now seemed shallow and often misguided in the face of her direct experience. There was a depth and complexity to Lakota society that few white scholars had bothered to understand or document. Dawn was still hours away when Swift Fox tapped softly on her teepee. Sarah had slept little, her mind too full of the day's events and tomorrow's uncertainties. Still, she rose immediately, gathering the few possessions she would take with her, her traveling bag, the journal, and now the knife Swift Fox had given her. Outside, the camp was almost unrecognizable. Most of the teepees had already been dismantled and packed, their component parts loaded onto travois or carried by pack horses. The cooking fires had been carefully extinguished, the ashes scattered to leave minimal evidence of their presence. Families moved with practiced efficiency, children helping alongside adults in the pre-dawn darkness. Storm Dancer stood ready, already saddled with what Sarah recognized as a woman's saddle, different from the one she had ridden the previous night. Wachiwi approached, helping Sarah secure her bag and showing her how to adjust the stirrups properly. Through the dim light, Sarah could make out Rising Sun, mounted on his white horse, conferring with Black Hawk and other warriors at the edge of what had been the camp. They were discussing something intently, patrol routes, Sarah guessed, or contingency plans if they encountered soldiers. "We will travel separately from the main group," Swift Fox explained as he helped Sarah mount. "My father thinks it's safer for you. The soldiers will be looking for a large band, not a small family group." "Where will we meet the others?" Sarah asked. "At the place of the 3 Eagles, 2 days' journey from here," he replied. "It is a hidden valley known only to our people." As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Sarah found herself riding between Swift Fox and 2 bears with Wachiwi, Little Eagle, and Mapia, following close behind on their horses. They moved away from the Missouri, heading west into rougher country, rolling hills covered with grass and scattered stands of trees. Sarah glanced back once, seeing the larger group of Lakota already disappearing into the landscape like shadows, melting into darkness. She turned forward again, fixing her eyes on the path ahead and wondering what new revelations this journey would bring. Behind them, the campsite lay empty, with barely a trace to show that 50 people had lived there, just hours before. By the time the soldiers from Fort Robinson expanded their search to include this area, they would find nothing but wind moving through grass and the endless sky stretching overhead. The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah and the small family group made their way through increasingly rugged terrain. 2 bears led them confidently, choosing paths that seemed indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape to Sarah's untrained eye. They avoided ridgelines where they might be silhouetted against the sky, keeping instead to shallow ravines. And the shadows of scattered pine groves. "How does he know which way to go?" Sarah asked Swift Fox quietly as they navigated a particularly rocky stretch. "There's no trail that I can see." "The land itself is the trail," Swift Fox replied. "My father reads it like your people read books. The shape of a hill, the type of grass growing in a particular spot, the direction of the wind, all these things tell him where we are and where we should go." Sarah marveled at this different way of understanding the world. Her own education had emphasized maps with clearly marked routes, compass directions, and measured distances. This organic, intuitive navigation seemed almost mystical by comparison. Around midday, they stopped in a sheltered hollow where a small spring bubbled from between rocks. 2 bears dismounted first, surveying the area carefully before indicating that the others could rest. They watered the horses and ate a simple meal of pemmican, dried meat mixed with berries and fat, that Wachiwi distributed from a pouch. Little Eagle seemed tireless despite the long morning's ride, scrambling up rocks to keep watch with his father. Sarah noticed how 2 bears was constantly teaching his younger son, pointing out tracks and signs that were invisible to her. "He's learning to be a scout," Swift Fox explained, following her gaze. "In the old days, he would have been training to be a warrior and hunter. Now," he shrugged, leaving the thought unfinished. "Now the world is changing," Sarah completed quietly. Too quickly, Mapia interjected in Lakota, surprising Sarah with her sudden participation in their conversation. The old woman rarely spoke directly to her, usually communicating through Swift Fox or Wachiwi. Swift Fox translated his grandmother's words. She says, "The white man's world moves like a prairie fire, consuming everything in its path. Our people are like the small creatures who must run ahead of the flames or be destroyed." "Not all fires destroy completely," Sarah responded, thinking of what she knew about prairie ecology. "Some plants need fire to release their seeds. New growth comes after." When this was translated, Mapia studied Sarah with new interest. She spoke again, her voice carrying a note of approval. "She says you understand more than most white people," Swift Fox translated. "Perhaps this is why the spirits guided you to save Little Eagle." They continued their journey after the brief rest, now heading into more densely wooded hills. The terrain grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through some passages. Sarah's city-bred muscles protested, but she refused to complain, noting how even elderly Mapia managed the difficult sections with dignified determination. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising rain. Two bears increased their pace, evidently seeking shelter before the storm broke. They crested a rise and descended into a narrow valley where a cluster of ancient cottonwoods surrounded another spring, larger than the one where they had rested. "Earlier, we will camp here tonight," Swift Fox told Sarah as they dismounted. "This place is well hidden, and the trees will provide cover from both the rain and any searching eyes." The family worked together to establish their camp, erecting only two small teepees, one for two bears, Wachiwi and Little Eagle, the other for Mapia, Sarah, and Swift Fox. They kept no cooking fire, eating cold provisions instead to avoid smoke that might be spotted from a distance. As predicted, rain began to fall just as they completed their preparations. Sarah sat with Swift Fox beneath the shelter of a cottonwood overhang, watching the downpour transform the landscape. Water streamed down the hillsides, turning the dry creek bed near their camp into a rushing channel. "The rain is good for us," Swift Fox commented. "It will wash away any tracks we left." "Do you think the soldiers are following?" Sarah asked. He gazed thoughtfully at the darkening valley. "Perhaps. My father believes they would have started searching the area near our abandoned camp by midday. Whether they found sign of our passing depends on how skilled their trackers are." "Would they continue searching in this weather?" "White soldiers often lack patience," Swift Fox replied with a hint of disdain. "They prefer comfort to success, but it would be foolish to underestimate them. Some have learned our ways after years of fighting our people." The conversation paused as Wachiwi approached, beckoning them to join the others in Two Bear's tipi. Inside, the small space was warm and dry, illuminated by a tiny, smokeless fire in the center pit. The family arranged themselves in a circle, with Sarah given a place of honor, opposite Two Bears. Through Swift Fox's translation, Two Bears outlined their plan for the coming days. "We will continue west tomorrow, then turn north toward the place. Called Devil's Tower by white men. Our people name it Bear's Lodge. From there we will head east to the meeting place at Three Eagles." "Will we avoid settlements?" Sarah asked. Two Bears nodded. "There is a trading post 3 days' ride from here, but we will go around it. The man there knows me and might report our passing to the soldiers." Little Eagle, sitting between his parents, asked a question that made the adults exchange glances. "My brother wants to know if you will return to your people eventually or stay with us forever," Swift Fox translated, his tone carefully neutral. All eyes turned to Sarah, awaiting her answer. She considered carefully before responding. "I don't know what the future holds," she said honestly. "For now, I'm grateful for your protection and guidance. I hope someday there will be a way for me to live peacefully in this territory without endangering your family or abandoning my profession." When Swift Fox translated this, Two Bears nodded approvingly, and Wachiwi reached across to squeeze Sarah's hand briefly. Little Eagle looked disappointed but accepting. Mapia spoke then, her weathered face animated in the flickering firelight. "My grandmother says that paths that seem separate often join unexpectedly," Swift Fox translated. "She had a dream last night of an eagle and a dove flying together, neither bird changing its nature, yet sharing the same sky. A powerful vision," Two Bears commented, inclining his head respectfully toward his mother. The conversation shifted to practical matters, how long the rain might last, whether it was falling in Riverton as well, how this might affect the soldiers' search. Sarah listened, increasingly able to follow the rhythms of Lakota speech, even without understanding most of the words. Later, as Sarah prepared for sleep in the teepee she shared with Mapia and Swift Fox, the old woman approached her with a small object in her hand. It was a carved wooden bird, a meadowlark, Sarah thought, though the simplicity of the carving made precise identification difficult. Mapia placed it in Sarah's palm, speaking softly. She says her husband carved this for her when they were young. Swift Fox, translated from across the tipi. The meadowlark sings at dawn, welcoming each new day regardless of what hardships the previous day brought. She wants you to have it as a reminder that each sunrise offers a fresh beginning. Sarah was touched by the unexpected gift. Please tell her I'll treasure it and remember its meaning. After Mapia had settled onto her sleeping furs, Swift Fox spoke quietly to Sarah. My grandmother doesn't give her treasures lightly. She sees something in you that has earned her respect. I'm honored, Sarah replied, but I'm not sure what I've done to deserve it. Perhaps it's not what you've done, but who you are, Swift Fox suggested, or who you might become. The rain continued through the night, drumming steadily on the tipi cover. Despite her physical exhaustion, Sarah found sleep elusive. Her mind kept returning to Riverton, wondering what was happening there. Had the soldiers questioned her neighbors? What had Martha Williams thought upon finding her note? Would the school board simply replace her, erasing her presence from the community as easily as rain washed away footprints? Morning brought clearing skies and a landscape transformed by the rainfall. Streams that had been dry now flowed vigorously, and the vegetation seemed to have greened overnight. They broke camp efficiently, leaving minimal evidence of their presence, and continued their journey westward. The day passed without incident, the terrain growing increasingly dramatic as they traveled. Flat-topped buttes rose from the rolling plains, and stands of ponderosa pine became more common. Wildlife was abundant. Deer bounded away at their approach, and once they spotted a small herd of pronghorn antelope in the distance. By late afternoon, they had reached a ridgeline that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding country. Two bears halted the group, surveying the landscape with intense concentration. After a few minutes, he pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from a valley. Perhaps 5 miles distant. Soldiers, he said in English, one of the few words he spoke in Sarah's language. Swift Fox elaborated. My father thinks they have established a camp there, probably planning to continue their search tomorrow. How can he be sure it's soldiers? Sarah asked. Couldn't it be other travelers? The location, Swift Fox explained after consulting with his father. It's near a main trail but not directly on it. A position that allows observation without being easily spotted. And the smoke is too controlled for a settler's campfire. Military men are trained to keep their fires small. They withdrew from the ridgeline and made camp in a hidden draw, taking even greater precautions than the previous night. No tipis were erected. Instead, they created simple shelters of pine boughs. They ate cold food again, and 2 bears established a watch rotation, with each adult taking turns throughout the night. During her watch, Sarah sat wrapped in a buffalo robe, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. The vastness of the starry sky above made her feel small, yet strangely connected to something greater than herself. She thought of her life in Boston, the elegant townhouse where she had grown up, the social events her mother had insisted she attend, the polite young men who had courted her with carefully rehearsed compliments. How distant that world seemed now, how confined and artificial compared to the raw authenticity of her current circumstances. Here, stripped of social pretenses, she was learning who she truly was, her strengths and limitations, her capacity. For adaptation, her deepest values. A slight sound alerted her to Swift Fox's approach as he came to relieve her watch. He moved with such natural silence that she might not have noticed him if not for a deliberately displaced pebble. A courtesy, she realized, to avoid startling her. "Any signs of trouble?" he asked quietly, settling beside her. "None," she replied. "Only peace and stars." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Swift Fox spoke again. "Tomorrow we reach more difficult country. The way to Bear's Lodge requires crossing open ground where we might be spotted. My father is concerned." "Is there an alternative route?" "A longer path through the Badlands," he said. "It would add 2 days to our journey, but offer better concealment." "What does your father think is best?" "He believes we should take the risk and cross quickly," Swift Fox replied. "Storm clouds are building in the west again. If we time our crossing with their arrival, the reduced visibility will help shield us." Sarah nodded, trusting Two Bear's judgment. "I'll follow his lead." Swift Fox studied her face in the starlight. "You've changed since I first met you by the river," he observed. "There's a different quality to your spirit." "How so?" Sarah asked, curious about his perception. "When I first saw you, you moved through the world like someone who observes but doesn't belong," he explained thoughtfully. "Now you move as if you're part of the land itself, accepting what it offers and what it demands." The insight struck Sarah as profound. "Perhaps I'm learning what your people have always known, that we don't stand apart from the world, but exist within it." Swift Fox nodded, pleased with her understanding. "This is the beginning of wisdom. My grandmother would say your spirit is awakening." Dawn found them already moving, Two Bears setting a brisk pace toward a distant gap between two buttes. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, as the landscape became increasingly dramatic. Towering rock formations erupted from the plains, evidence of ancient volcanic activity and millennia of erosion. By mid-morning, they had reached the edge of a broad, open valley. On the far side, perhaps 3 miles distant, rose a line of hills that would provide cover for the remainder of their journey to Bear's Lodge. Between lay exposed grassland with little concealment. Two Bears studied the sky, where dark clouds were indeed gathering from the west, though still far off. He conferred briefly with Wachiwi and Mapia, then turned to Sarah and Swift Fox. "We will wait until the storm is closer," Swift Fox translated his father's decision. "Then cross as quickly as possible. The rain will hide us, and few travelers would be abroad in such weather." They withdrew to a sheltered spot below the ridgeline and prepared for the crossing. Wachiwi tightened the straps on all their packs and added additional rawhide covers to protect important items from the coming downpour. Two Bears checked each horse's hooves, ensuring they were ready for a swift journey. Little Eagle, sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet, staying close to his mother. Even Mapia's normally impassive face showed concern as she gazed periodically at the darkening sky. As the leading edge of the storm reached them, bringing gusting wind and the first scattered raindrops, Two Bears gave the signal to mount up. He led them to the edge of the open ground, surveying it one final time before committing to the crossing. Just as they were about to urge their horses forward, Swift Fox raised his hand in warning. He pointed to the northern end of the valley, where a dust cloud was just becoming visible, riders approaching at a gallop. "Soldiers," Two Bears stated grimly, this time using the English word as a curse. The storm was still minutes away from providing its promised cover, but their window for crossing undetected was closing rapidly. The approaching riders would have a clear view of the valley in moments. Two Bears made a swift decision, gesturing urgently for the group to follow him away from the valley's edge, back down the slope they had ascended. They retreated, perhaps 100 yards to where a tumble of massive boulders created a natural fortress. "We must hide the horses and ourselves," Swift Fox translated, as his father issued rapid instructions. "If we are spotted, we will be pursued. If we are pursued, we will be caught. If we are caught—" He left the consequences unspoken, working. Quickly, they led the horses into a narrow defile between the largest boulders, where they would be concealed from casual observation. Two bears directed Sarah and the others to take shelter in a small cave-like opening formed by fallen rocks. "What about you?" Sarah asked as Swift Fox translated the instructions. "My father will keep watch," came the reply. "If the soldiers pass without seeing us, we can attempt the crossing when the storm fully arrives. And if they do see us?" Two Bears answered directly, his expression resolute. "Then I will lead them away from you," Swift Fox translated. "You must continue to Bear's Lodge without me." Before Sarah could protest this self-sacrificing plan, the sound of hoofbeats grew suddenly louder. The soldiers had changed direction. They were heading directly toward the rocky outcrop where the group had taken refuge. Time seemed to slow as the hoofbeats grew louder. Inside their rocky shelter, Sarah could feel Little Eagle trembling against her side. Wachiwi pulled her son closer, one hand covering his mouth to ensure his silence. Mapia's eyes were closed, her lips moving in silent prayer. Swift Fox crouched at the entrance to their hiding place, a knife in his hand, though what good a single blade would do against army rifles, Sarah couldn't imagine. Two bears had vanished, among the boulders, moving with the silent grace of a mountain lion. Through a small gap in the rocks, Sarah could just make out the approaching riders, 6 soldiers in blue uniforms, led by a man whose insignia marked him as a lieutenant. They moved with the watchful tension of men expecting trouble, rifles held at the ready. The storm clouds had darkened the sky, but the rain held off, as if nature itself were conspiring to aid their pursuers. A gust of wind sent a swirl of dust into the air, causing one of the horses to sneeze. Sarah's heart nearly stopped, certain the sound would give them away. The lieutenant raised his hand, signaling the patrol to halt perhaps 50 yards from their hiding place. He stood in his stirrups, surveying the rocky outcrop with clear suspicion. "Fan out," Sarah heard him order. "Check those rocks. Could be a perfect spot for an ambush." The soldiers began to dismount, preparing to search the boulder field on foot. Discovery seemed inevitable. Sarah exchanged a glance with Swift Fox, whose expression confirmed her fears. If the soldiers found them, there was no plausible explanation for why a white woman would be hiding with the Lakota family. At best, she would be forcibly rescued, and they would be arrested. At worst, a sudden movement on the ridgeline above caught everyone's attention. A lone rider on a distinctive paint horse appeared silhouetted against the darkening sky, Two Bears deliberately showing himself. He raised his arm in what might have been a signal to non-existent companions, then wheeled his horse and disappeared. Over the ridge. "There," the lieutenant shouted. "Mounted pursuit, now!" The soldiers scrambled back onto their horses, abandoning their plan to search the rocks in favor of chasing the fleeing rider. Within moments, they had galloped away, the thunder of hooves fading as they pursued Two Bears up and over the ridge. Swift Fox immediately moved to the entrance of their shelter. "We must cross the valley now," he said urgently. "My father has given us this chance at great risk to himself." "But what about him?" Sarah asked as they hurried to retrieve their horses. "He knows these lands better than any man," Swift Fox replied, helping his grandmother mount. "If anyone can evade soldiers, it is my father. He will circle back and meet us at Bear's Lodge if he can." The worry on Wachiwi's face belied this confident assessment, but she said nothing, focusing instead on securing Little Eagle before her on her horse. The boy's eyes were wide with fear for his father, though he remained bravely silent. With Swift Fox now leading, they emerged from the rocks and rode swiftly toward the valley floor. The storm finally broke as they reached the open ground, rain falling in heavy sheets that limited visibility to a few dozen yards. Perfect cover for their crossing. Lightning flashed overhead, and thunder boomed across the landscape as they urged their horses to a gallop. Sarah bent low over Storm Dancer's neck, the rain stinging her face and soaking through her clothing. The mare seemed to understand the urgency, running smoothly despite the increasingly muddy ground. Behind her, Mapia clung to her mount with surprising strength for one so elderly, her white hair plastered to her head by the downpour. They crossed the exposed valley in perhaps 20 minutes, reaching the sheltering hills on the far side without sign of pursuit. Swift Fox led them into a dense stand of pines that offered some protection from the worst of the storm, where they paused to catch their breath and assess their situation. "Will your father know to meet us here?" Sarah asked, water streaming from her drenched clothing. Swift Fox shook his head. "Not here. We must continue to Bear's Lodge as planned. It's still a day's journey from this point." Wachiwi spoke up, her voice tight with concern. Swift Fox translated, "My mother says we should find shelter until the storm passes. Little Eagle is cold, and grandmother is not young." They found a suitable location deeper in the pines, a small clearing sheltered by overhanging branches that kept the worst of the rain at bay. Working together, they created a simple lean-to using branches and the oilskin covers from their packs. It was cramped and far from comfortable, but it provided enough protection to build a small, nearly smokeless fire using the dry inner bark of pine trees and deadwood sheltered beneath fallen logs. As they huddled around the tiny flame, Sarah noticed Little Eagle's miserable expression. Though he hadn't complained, the boy was clearly frightened for his father and chilled to the bone. She removed her outer garment, a leather vest Wachiwi had given her, and wrapped it around his shoulders. "Your father is very brave," she told him, knowing he wouldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would convey reassurance. "He'll find his way back to us," Swift Fox translated, and Little Eagle nodded solemnly, clutching the vest around himself. "He says thank you," Swift Fox added, "and that his father taught him that a warrior must be strong even when afraid." The storm continued unabated for hours, transforming the landscape outside their shelter into a world of water and mud. They ate sparingly from their provisions, saving as much as possible for the journey ahead. No one spoke much, each lost in their own thoughts about Two Bear's fate and their own precarious situation. As evening approached and the rain finally began to slacken, Swift Fox ventured out to scout their surroundings. He returned looking grim. "The valley is flooded," he reported. "The soldiers would have been forced to seek higher ground, which means they may still be searching the ridges. We should remain here tonight and continue at first light." Mapia spoke, then addressing Swift Fox at length. When she finished, he turned to Sarah. "My grandmother says we must perform a ceremony tonight to ask the spirits to protect my father," he explained. "She asks if you would participate. It is unusual to include an outsider, but she believes your presence might strengthen the prayer." "I would be honored," Sarah replied, touched by the invitation. They waited until full darkness before beginning. Swift Fox cleared a small space and arranged stones in a circular pattern. Wachiwi produced a small pouch of herbs from her belongings, which she sprinkled over the coals of their fire, creating fragrant smoke that filled their shelter. Mapia began a low, rhythmic chant, her voice stronger than Sarah would have expected. From one so aged, Swift Fox instructed Sarah to sit opposite his grandmother in the circle. "Place your hands on the earth," he said. "Feel its strength beneath you. The same earth supports my father wherever he is tonight." The ceremony continued for perhaps an hour, with Mapia leading prayers in Lakota that Swift Fox occasionally translated in whispers. They called upon ancestors, upon the spirits of the four directions, upon the sacred beings that inhabited the natural world around them. Throughout it all, Sarah felt a growing sense of connection, not just to the family with whom she shared this shelter, but to something larger and more profound. When the ceremony concluded, Mapia reached across the circle and took Sarah's hands. In her own, she spoke directly to her, maintaining eye contact despite the language barrier between them. My grandmother says that tonight you have shared in our most sacred ways, Swift Fox translated. She says the spirits have accepted your presence among us. From this night forward, you carry a piece of our people's heart within you, as we now carry a piece of yours. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes at the simple profundity of this statement. Tell her I feel the truth of her words, she replied, and that I will honor the trust she has placed in me. After the ceremony, they settled in to sleep as best they could in the cramped shelter. Despite her physical discomfort, wet clothing, hard ground, limited space, Sarah felt a curious peace. Whatever dangers tomorrow might bring, tonight she had been granted a privilege few outsiders ever experienced, genuine acceptance into the spiritual life of the Lakota. Morning brought clearing skies and the challenge of continuing their journey without Two Bears' guidance. Swift Fox stepped naturally into the leadership role, though Sarah noted how frequently he consulted with his mother and grandmother before making decisions. The floodwaters are receding, he announced after an early scouting expedition. But they've washed away parts of the trail. We'll need to find alternative routes in some places. They broke camp efficiently, leaving minimal trace of their presence, and resumed their journey toward Bear's Lodge. The landscape grew increasingly dramatic as they traveled, with towering rock formations and deep canyons requiring careful navigation. Swift Fox proved a capable guide, though not as confident in his route finding as his father had been. By midday, they had entered a narrow canyon whose walls rose hundreds of feet on either side. The path followed the course of a stream, now swollen with yesterday's rain. The footing was treacherous, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through the most difficult sections. This canyon leads to the sacred ground near Bear's Lodge, Swift Fox explained, as they picked their way along the rocky path. In better times, our people would come here for vision quests and important ceremonies. It's beautiful, Sarah commented, gazing up at the sheer walls where stunted pine trees somehow found purchase in seemingly impossible locations. Beauty and danger often walk hand in hand, Swift Fox replied, gesturing toward the rushing water beside them. This stream could become a raging torrent with little warning if rain falls in the mountains above. They had traversed perhaps half the canyon's length when Swift Fox suddenly halted, raising his hand in warning. He pointed to something ahead on the path. Fresh hoofprints in the mud, heading in the same direction they were traveling. Soldiers? Sarah whispered, fear tightening her chest. Swift Fox knelt to examine the tracks more closely. No, he said after a moment. These are unshod hooves, Indian ponies, and they're very fresh. Your father. Wachiwi asked hopefully in Lakota. Swift Fox shook his head. Too many horses, perhaps 6 or 7, and they're moving together, not the pattern of a single rider. Could it be others from your band? Sarah suggested. Perhaps some took this route to the meeting place. Possible, Swift Fox conceded, though he looked unconvinced. But these tracks lead deeper into the canyon, not toward Bear's Lodge. We should proceed with caution. They continued more slowly now, alert for any sign. Of the riders ahead, the canyon narrowed further, the walls closing in until the sky above was just a ribbon of blue. The sound of water echoed against the stone, making it difficult to hear anything else. Around a sharp bend, the canyon suddenly widened into a small circular area where several side canyons converged. Swift Fox signaled for them to halt in the shadow of an overhanging rock, his expression tense. Wait here, he whispered. I'll scout ahead. Before he could move, however, riders appeared from one of the side canyons. 7 men on horseback, their faces painted with red and black stripes. They wore a mixture of traditional Lakota clothing and items clearly taken from white settlers. One wore a cavalry hat, another a settler's woolen coat over his buckskin leggings. The newcomers spotted them immediately, spreading out to block the path ahead. Their leader, A powerfully built man with a scarred face and a necklace of bear claws urged his horse forward. He spoke in Lakota, his tone challenging. Swift Fox replied, keeping his voice steady, though Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Who are they?" she whispered to Wachiwi, who had moved protectively in front of Little Eagle. "Ghost dancers," Wachiwi replied in halting English, using one of the few phrases she knew in Sarah's language. Sarah had heard of the ghost dance movement, a spiritual revival among native peoples that had spread across the Western Territories in recent years. Some believers claimed that performing the sacred dance would bring about the return of the buffalo, the departure of white settlers, and the restoration of traditional native ways. The U.S. Army considered ghost dance practitioners dangerous, radicals who might incite violence. The conversation between Swift Fox and the leader grew more heated. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the confrontational tone was unmistakable. The other riders began to move their horses, subtly positioning themselves to surround Sarah's group. Swift Fox turned to them, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Sarah could tell from Wachiwi's frightened expression that the news wasn't good. "They are Red Hawk's band," Swift Fox explained in English for Sarah's benefit. "They've broken from the reservation and refuse to return. They practice the ghost dance and believe it will protect them from white men's bullets." "What do they want with us?" Sarah asked, eyeing the aggressive postures of the mounted men. "They want to know why we travel with a white woman," Swift Fox replied grimly. "I told them about Little Eagle's rescue and Rising Sun's declaration of friendship, but they are suspicious. They think you might be a spy." "A spy?" Sarah repeated incredulously. "But that's absurd. To men who have seen their people betrayed many times, trust doesn't come easily," Swift Fox said. "Red Hawk says we must go with them to their camp. He will decide there what to do with us." "Can we refuse?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Swift Fox shook his head. "They outnumber us, and we have women, a child, and an elder to protect. We have no choice but to comply." Red Hawk barked an order, and two of his men moved forward to take the reins of their horses. With obvious reluctance, Swift Fox surrendered Storm Dancer's lead, whispering to Sarah, "Say nothing. Let me speak for all of us." The ghost dancers led them through a side canyon that twisted and turned through the rocky landscape. After perhaps an hour of travel, they emerged into a hidden valley where a small encampment had been established. Unlike the orderly arrangement of Rising Sun's band, this camp had a makeshift quality, teepees mixed with crude shelters of branches, and hides, as if established in haste and with limited resources. Women and children appeared from the shelters as they approached, watching with undisguised curiosity. Sarah noted their thin faces and worn clothing. These were people living on the edge of survival, far from the government rations of the reservation. They were brought to a central clearing where a large fire pit had been dug, though no fire burned at present. Red Hawk dismounted and ordered them to do likewise. Under the watchful eyes of his warriors, they were instructed to sit on logs arranged around the fire pit. Red Hawk paced before them, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the camp to hear. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, his theatrical gestures and the reactions of the onlookers told her he was building a case against them, or more specifically, against her. Swift Fox occasionally attempted to interject, but Red Hawk shouted him down each time. Finally, the ghost dance leader pointed directly at Sarah, his voice rising to a crescendo. "He says you represent everything that has destroyed their way of life," Swift Fox translated quietly. "He says your people broke every treaty, stole their land, killed the buffalo, and now seek to erase their very existence. He says that by bringing you into sacred territory, we have desecrated places the white eyes should never see." "What does he intend to do?" Sarah asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Before Swift Fox could answer, a commotion erupted at the edge of the camp. Warriors rushed to investigate, returning moments later with a single prisoner walking between them. Two bears, his hands bound before him, his face bearing a fresh cut above one eye. Wachiwi cried out at the sight of her husband, while Little Eagle buried his face against her side. Two Bear's expression remained stoic as he was brought forward and forced to kneel before Red Hawk. "My father," Swift Fox whispered, tension evident in every line of his body. "They must have captured him while he was trying to find us." Red Hawk addressed Two Bears contemptuously, gesturing towards Sarah and the others. Two Bears replied with dignity despite his bonds, speaking at length in a measured tone. Whatever he said clearly angered Red Hawk, who struck him across the face with an open hand. Swift Fox started to rise, but Mapia gripped his arm, restraining him. The old woman's eyes were alert, calculating, watching the dynamics of the confrontation with the wisdom of her years. "What's happening?" Sarah whispered, feeling helpless as the exchange continued. "Red Hawk accuses my father of betraying our own people by associating with whites," Swift Fox replied, his voice tight with controlled fury. "My father is reminding him that Rising Sun, our chief, made his decision after careful consideration, and that Red Hawk has no authority to overrule him." The confrontation intensified, with Red Hawk growing increasingly agitated, while Two Bears maintained his composure. Finally, the ghost dance leader turned to address the gathered members of his band, clearly making some sort of proclamation. "He says they will hold a council tonight to decide our fate," Swift Fox translated, his expression grim. "Until then, we are to be kept under guard in that shelter." He nodded toward a crude lean-to at the edge of the clearing. As Red Hawk's warriors moved to escort them to their makeshift prison, Sarah caught Two Bears' eye. Despite his injury and the precariousness of their situation, she saw no fear in his gaze, only a steady resolve that somehow conveyed reassurance. Whatever happened next, Two Bears would face it with the same courage and dignity he had shown throughout their journey. The question was whether courage alone would be enough to save them from Red Hawk's evident hatred and the desperate anger of his followers. The lean-to where they were confined offered little protection from the elements and less from the hostile stares of Red Hawk's followers. Two guards stood watch outside, their rifles held at the ready. Inside, the family huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. "How badly are you hurt?" Wachiwi asked her husband, examining the cut above his eye. "It's nothing," Two Bears replied, though the dried blood on his temple suggested otherwise. "I was careless. After leading the soldiers away, I circled back to find you, but rode into Red Hawk's scouts instead." Little Eagle clung to his father, relief at his return, tempered by their dangerous circumstances. Mapia sat slightly apart, her eyes closed in what might have been prayer or deep thought. "What will happen at the council?" Sarah asked Swift Fox. He exchanged a glance with his father before answering. "Red Hawk will argue that you should be killed as an example, and the rest of us punished for bringing you here. He believes that only by completely rejecting all white ways can his people survive. And he has followers who share this belief," Two Bears added, his words translated by his son. "Men and women who have lost everything and see no future except through the ghost dance and its promises." "Can't we explain why I'm here, that I saved Little Eagle's life?" Sarah suggested. Two Bears shook his head. "Red Hawk knows this already. He doesn't care. To him, one good act doesn't balance the evils committed by your people." "Is there no way to reason with him?" Sarah pressed. "Red Hawk's heart is consumed by hatred," Two Bears replied, "and fear. The ghost dance gives him power he never had before, the power to offer hope, even if it's false hope." As twilight deepened into night, they could see preparations being made for the council. A great fire was lit in the central clearing, and the members of the band gathered around it. Red Hawk took a position of prominence, wearing an elaborate headdress and a shirt decorated with symbols Sarah didn't recognize, the ghost shirt. Swift Fox whispered, noticing her gaze. "He believes it will stop bullets from harming him." A drum began to beat, its rhythm like a heartbeat in the night. Red Hawk rose and began to dance around the fire, soon joined by others. Their movements became increasingly frenzied as the drumbeat quickened, some dancers falling into trance-like states. "They're trying to summon spirit power before making their decision," Two Bears explained through Swift Fox. After perhaps an hour of this ceremonial preparation, Red Hawk halted the dance. He gestured toward their shelter, and the guards moved to bring them to the council. They were positioned facing Red Hawk across the fire, with the band members forming a circle around them. The firelight cast dramatic shadows, making the painted faces of the ghost dancers appear even more intimidating. Red Hawk began to speak, his voice rising and falling dramatically as he addressed his followers. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, the hatred in his eyes when he looked at her required no translation. Two Bears listened impassively until Red Hawk finished, then rose to speak despite his bonds. He addressed the gathered band with dignity and force, his voice steady and assured. Several times during his speech, Sarah noticed confused or thoughtful expressions, replacing the hostility on some listeners' faces. When Two Bears finished, Red Hawk responded angrily, gesturing expansively at the night sky and then pointing accusingly at Sarah. Other men rose to speak as well, some seemingly in support of Red Hawk, others more measured in their comments. "What are they saying?" Sarah whispered to Swift Fox, "Red Hawk claims you represent the destruction of our way of life." He translated quietly, "My father reminds them that hatred has never brought our people strength, only more suffering." He speaks of rising sun's wisdom in recognizing that some whites, like you, can be bridges between our worlds rather than enemies. The debate continued, growing more heated. Red Hawk's most fervent supporters called for immediate action, while others counseled caution. Through it all, Sarah noticed Mapia watching silently, her ancient eyes missing nothing. Finally, the old woman rose. A hush fell over the gathering as she walked slowly to the center of the circle. Though physically frail, her presence commanded immediate respect. Even Red Hawk fell silent. Mapia began to speak, her voice surprisingly strong. She gestured toward Sarah, then to Little Eagle, then upward at the stars overhead. As she continued, Sarah saw several of the ghost dancers exchange troubled glances. "My grandmother speaks of visions she has had," Swift Fox translated softly. "Visions of the future. She says that Red Hawk's path leads only to more death and suffering for our people. She says the ghost dance, while born of genuine spiritual power, has been twisted by fear and desperation." Mapia turned to face Red Hawk directly, challenging him with words Swift Fox didn't need to translate. Their power was evident in her stance and tone. The ghost dance leader seemed to physically diminish under her steady gaze. "She's reminding him that she was a respected medicine woman before he was born," Two Bears murmured, "that she has earned the right to be heard." Mapia concluded by approaching Sarah and placing a weathered hand on her head in what was clearly a blessing. Then she returned to her place beside her family, her message delivered. A long silence followed. The fire crackled, sending sparks toward the star-filled sky. Red Hawk stood frozen, clearly struggling with the challenge to his authority. Finally, another elder, a man whose face bore the deep lines of one who had seen many winters, rose to speak. "That is Grey Wolf," Swift Fox whispered. "He is respected even by Red Hawk." Grey Wolf spoke briefly but forcefully, then turned to the gathered band members, apparently asking for their thoughts. One by one, they called out responses. "They're voting," Swift Fox explained. "Grey Wolf has proposed that we be allowed to continue our journey unharmed, but that you must swear never to reveal the location of their camp to white authorities." When the impromptu vote concluded, Grey Wolf approached Red Hawk, speaking to him quietly but firmly. The ghost dance leader's face contorted with suppressed rage, but after a tense moment, he gave a sharp nod. Grey Wolf turned to them, addressing two bears in Lakota. "He says we will be freed at dawn," Swift Fox translated. "We must leave their territory immediately and never speak of finding them here." "What about Red Hawk?" Sarah asked, noting the man's barely contained fury. "He has been overruled, but not convinced." Two bears replied grimly after Swift Fox translated. "His pride is wounded. Such men are always dangerous." They were escorted back to their shelter, though the atmosphere had subtly changed. The guards seemed less hostile, and one even offered them water and some dried meat. "Mapia saved us," Sarah said quietly as they settled in for the night. "What exactly did she say to sway them?" Swift Fox hesitated before answering. "My grandmother told them she had seen two futures in her visions. In one, they killed you and continued on Red Hawk's path, which led to their destruction at the hands of soldiers within a moon's passing. In the other, they honored the ancient laws of hospitality and lived to see the next spring's growth." "Was it true? Did she really have such visions?" Sarah asked. Swift Fox smiled slightly. "My grandmother has always had a gift for seeing what might be. Whether she saw these specific futures or simply understood what would likely happen," he shrugged, "the effect is the same." Dawn came with a heavy mist shrouding the valley. They were brought before Grey Wolf, who had assumed leadership of the proceedings. Red Hawk was notably absent. Grey Wolf returned their possessions and spoke briefly to two bears, who nodded in response. "He says we must leave now," Swift Fox translated. "They will provide an escort to ensure we exit their territory safely, but also to make sure we don't linger or observe more than necessary." As they prepared to depart, Sarah felt compelled to address Grey Wolf directly. "Thank you," she said simply, meeting his eyes. "I understand your caution and respect your decision." When Swift Fox translated her words, the elder's weathered face softened slightly. He replied with a brief statement. "He says you have an unusual spirit for a white woman," Swift Fox translated. "He hopes you will use your understanding of our ways wisely when you return to your own people." They left the Ghost Dancers' camp under escort of 4 warriors, riding northward through twisting canyons that gradually opened onto rolling plains. By midday, they had reached a distinctive rock formation shaped like a crouching bear. "This is their boundary," Two Bears explained through Swift Fox. "From here, we continue alone to Bear's Lodge." The escort departed without ceremony, leaving them to make their own way. As they rode toward the distinctive silhouette of Bear's Lodge, visible on the distant horizon, Sarah reflected on all that had transpired since that fateful day by the river. In saving Little Eagle, she had set in motion events that transformed her understanding of herself and the complex world she inhabited. 2 days later, they arrived at the place of the 3 Eagles, where Rising Sun and the main band awaited them. The reunion was joyous, with much embracing and excited conversation. Sarah was welcomed as if she were a long-lost relative rather than an outsider who had joined them only days ago. That evening, as they sat around the council fire, Rising Sun listened intently to Two Bears' account of their journey, including their encounter with Red Hawk's band. When the tale was complete, the chief turned to Sarah. "My grandson's life water was returned to him through your courage," he said, Swift Fox translating. "Now you have shared in both the beauty and danger of our people's path. What lies in your heart after these experiences?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I came west, seeking purpose," she replied. "I believed I found it in teaching settler children. Now I see that was only part of my journey. There are bridges to be built between our peoples that go beyond." Mere words in a classroom. When this was translated, Rising Sun nodded approvingly. "The water knows no boundaries," he said. "It flows where it must, nourishing all it touches. Perhaps you are like the water, Mni Wikoni." 2 more weeks passed as Sarah lived among the Lakota, learning their ways and sharing her own knowledge. Eventually, news reached them that the soldiers had returned to Fort Robinson, the search abandoned after finding no trace of the Lakota invasion force. The time came when Sarah needed to make her decision, remain with the Lakota as they moved toward their winter grounds or return to the world she had left behind. Standing atop a hill overlooking the camp, she discussed her thoughts with Swift Fox. "I can do more good as a bridge between our peoples than by hiding from one side," she explained. "There are misconceptions and fears that need challenging on both sides." Swift Fox nodded understanding. "You have become my Waconi in truth, flowing between worlds, bringing life where you pass." The next day, Rising Sun provided an escort to guide Sarah to Fort Pierre, where she could begin anew without the complications that awaited in Riverton. Before she departed, each member of Two Bear's family presented her with a small token, practical items for her journey that were also symbols of their connection. Little Eagle gave her a tiny carved horse, a miniature version of Storm Dancer. "So you remember to visit," Swift Fox translated the boy's words. As Sarah mounted Storm Dancer for the journey, Rising Sun approached one final time. "The path between our peoples is long and difficult," he said through Swift Fox, "but those who walk it with an open heart make it safer for all who follow. Return to us when you can, Emni Wiconi. You will always have a place at our fire." Sarah rode away with the sunrise warming her back, carrying with her not just memories and gifts, but a newfound understanding of what it meant to truly build bridges between worlds divided by history and misunderstanding. The journey ahead would not be easy, but like water finding its way through the landscape, she would persist, bringing life and connection wherever she flowed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.